Hey, 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 my little Dorkerinos. It's that time of the month again, and you know what that means. That's right. It's time for Mr. Dork's terrifying little tales. I'm your heinous host, the titular Mr. Dork, coming at you live from the infamous Shadow Realm, an accursed place wherein light, much like true media literacy near where you live, is in tragically short supply. This week, it's Are You Afraid of the Dork? Season 2, Episode 10, Mr. Poe's Spooktacular Law. Comb your hair, pour yourself a customary cup of spiders, and settle in, because where this narrative gravy train is going, things are bound to get a little sticky. May the brown gravy of despair run down the chins of the gormless, and the stale appetizers of yesteryear chip the teeth of the unsuspecting, because in mere moments I'll be running this literary train all over the likes of you.
Mr. Poe's Spooktacular Law. Mr. Poe was a downright ghastly man, standing a tremendous 5'8", and bearing a breath that always inexplicably stank of cooked liver and cabbages, no matter what time one came upon him. He was also a presumably well-to-do soul, on account of him having the clearly largest house on all of Worthington Street, the richest neighborhood in the country. Though it seemed to most he was never a particularly public or gregarious man, he had a knack for inspiring gossip among neighbouring townsfolk, even going about his day-to-day life on account of his many eccentricities. He was perhaps a bit thin for his height, but not excessively so. Both his hair and his eyes were a kind of chestnut brown, though as the years carried on they both considerably dimmed in correspondence with the general tendencies of his advancing age. His face was neither entirely attractive or unso, with it generally being more pleasing to look at than not, and more composed than impassioned, but certainly not winning any prizes. Indeed, on paper, Mr. Poe was a perfectly ordinary, if reclusive man. So what was it about him that disturbed people so? What was it about him that caused them to reel back in horror after merely making accidental eye contact with him? In truth, it wasn't any one thing by itself, but more of how a series of them came together in jarring and implacably bothersome ways to make up the living oddity that was Mr. Poe. For starters, Mr. Poe never wore socks, a fact made 1,000 times worse by his borderline criminal tendency to dress himself in pants that were far too short for himself, and in the winter, shorts themselves. Yet another of Mr. Poe's many curious habits was his tendency to eavesdrop on others' conversations from some kind of hiding place, and then jump out at them and make monster noises when they drew near. It made no difference to Mr. Poe whether or not his hiding place was a particularly good one, such as a dense bush, or a bad one, such as a flagpole. If being detected well in advance deterred him somehow, Mr. Poe never showed it. He still jumped out regardless of whether his targets were aware of his presence or not. Based upon what you've read so far, it might surprise you to learn that Mr. Poe despised Halloween. Granted, no one ever directly asked him about his feelings for the holiday on account of him being such an erratic, such an aloof and a mumbly conversationalist, but Mr. Poe had his way of getting his dislike of the season across to people. For one thing, those who had the arguable misfortune of living near him within their lifetimes learned to anticipate Mr. Poe's impulse to collect rotten fruit and expired eggs from mid-October until around early November or so. For every year around Halloween evening, between 7 and 12, Mr. Poe would proceed to egg and pelt his own mansion with rotten goods. It was the most curious thing. No one could make the least bit of sense of it. Though it was his own property, and he wasn't hurting anyone, so people in the vicinity tended to discount it as yet another one of the man's countless bizarre quirks, and simply let him go to town with it. And so it was that every year Mr. Poe would thoroughly and violently pelt his palatial mansion for hours upon end, without once uttering the faintest whiff of an explanation as to what he was hoping to accomplish, and not once did any of the neighbors so much as offer to chime in. It wasn't entirely surprising if you wanted to come over. After all, Mr. Poe lived in a mansion overrun with vegetation. There was seldom human activity to be found anywhere around the property, leading to the land having a somewhat deserted vibe. His hedge garden walls had long since shriveled up and decayed past the point of being salvageable. His entire front yard was overrun with weeds, to the point in which it was now difficult to find a single patch of grass which wasn't dead or dying from malnutrition. The walkway up to his front door was quite severely faded and cracked. In spite of all of this, the neighbors knew that Mr. Poe wasn't short on cash. The man built and ran his own private water park in his backyard. And as though that weren't enough, he was making new additions in the form of additional slides and attractions almost every summer. That wasn't to say he ever made much use out of it. To the contrary, the vast majority of the time the water wasn't even running on any of the rides. And most curiously of all, Mr. Poe never opened his park to the public except on Arbor Day and Kwanzaa, which the neighbors had long given up trying to rationalize. It was as though he was the most high-functioning eccentric who ever lived. On and on it went. There was simply no end to his oddities. Once in a blue moon, whenever Mr. Poe happened to venture outside of his house, it was not unusual to find him lingering about parks, single-handedly reciting Shakespeare plays aloud to himself as he walked to and fro. Regarding his specific background, people were quite unsure. There was talk among general community members of him having been heard speaking in French, German, Italian, Swedish, Australian, and Bolivian, depending upon who encountered him. The most curious thing about this was that he seemed to slip into a slightly original dialect for each new person he addressed. His source of wealth was also a topic of much deliberation, though none who discussed it could ever come to any satisfactory conclusion as to precisely who Mr. Poe was or what industry he was even affiliated with. After years' worth of unsuccessful inquiries, it was most commonly agreed upon that he had inherited his wealth, and that he had never in fact earned much of anything in his personal endeavors. It was widely believed among Mr. Poe's neighbors that the man was simply far too odd to be able to be of much use gainfully employed anywhere. As you can probably imagine, Mr. Poe's constant bewildering and acutely disturbing tendencies made him the subject of many a rumor. Some people said they swore they saw him stalking them at night. Children speculated that he was perhaps actually a monster, or under the influence of some kind of spirit, and thought that the reason he never smiled was because he had filed his teeth into fangs, which were only revealed right before he died to devour someone whole. It was said among the most paranoid that the reason Mr. Poe's yard was so poorly maintained was because he didn't actually own the property he was staying at, and had in fact merely been squatting there for years after having killed the original owner. Parents shielded their children from him as he went past. Holy men and women threw crucifixes and holy water upon his feet as he went by. And more than once, gaggles of teenagers would dare themselves to break and enter into Mr. Poe's property in the hopes of unearthing some kind of bone-chilling secret, though no one had ever managed to find much of particularly great interest. This continued for years, until one day the neighborhood's interactions with Mr. Poe came to an abrupt and most surprising end. He didn't die, he disappeared. There was no other way to say it. Somehow, some way, Mr. Poe, alongside his entire property, water park, weeds and all, disappeared, leaving behind a massive 5,000 square foot hole in the ground where his estate used to be. It was the eeriest thing. The whole building and its associated landscaping were gone without a trace. Not the smallest speck of foundation or the least bit of piping to be found anywhere. Well, people searched high and low for a potential explanation as to how such a thing could have happened, but all to no avail. Though they did eventually come upon something. But the funny thing was, no one could seem to remember how. It was a letter written by Mr. Poe, and it went something like this. Salutations, ex-neighbors. I regret to inform you that you have all disappointed me. For 40 years I've done my very best to infuse all your lives with whimsy and fun, and for 40 years I've watched as you have all taken every opportunity to carry on being just as drab and uninspired as when I came into your lives. I have always been of a more mischievous temperament, and consequently only pretended to be an antisocial, super-weird shot-in for the last several decades of my life, in the hopes that some discerning and kind soul would be able to see through my ruse and befriend me for reasons other than my extremely inordinate wealth. Perhaps I was mistaken to approach matters this way, but I genuinely thought that if one could show that it was possible to remain young at heart well into one's advanced years, that maybe, just maybe, some of you might begin to show a bit more open-mindedness and enthusiasm engaging with those matters which were beyond your current understanding. I had hoped that one of these days one of you would have been able to see through my ironic and clearly farcical facade, so that I might be able to teach you about the wonders of life, and go on whimsical adventures with you all over the world, and travel to parts unknown, spreading joy with me all over the universe. But alas, you all interpreted what I had clearly intended in jest as having been done in complete seriousness, and have consequently all shut me out of your lives. I could have shown you fantastic things beyond your wildest dreams, and taught you the keys to everlasting life, laughter, and love. But alas, your own shallowness and judgmentalness have prevented you from getting to know the real me and achieving what could have been incredibly more fulfilling lives. Goodbye, neighborhood. I am traveling back to my home planet, never to return. Warm regards, Mr. Poe. And upon reading this letter, every man, woman, child, dog, insect, traffic cone, and other of Worthington Street wept, for they knew they would never encounter someone as weird, whimsical, and wise as Mr. Poe ever again. And at this outpouring of public energy, Mr. Poe shed but a single tear from his hiding place in the bushes before plugging his nose and shooting off into space, never to be seen by anyone on Earth ever again. The end.
It makes one laugh, one such individual being me. It also gives one pause, at least a little bit. Tell me, mortals, do you ever just get the urge to look out over the world going by and think about all those people living their lives? Every one of them with their own trajectories, all with places to be, thoughts to call their own, and presumably, at least for a good many of them, dreams. Tell me, do you ever see or hear a stranger passing by and think to yourself, what if they weren't so strange? And if you'd only stop and take a moment or two to get to know one another, you could probably form the basis of a lasting friendship, or any kind of relationship really, which could follow you for many days to come. To err is human. This much has long been established. But have you not considered, mortal, that to have limitations is to live at all? You are but a dot, a speck, a thought, viewed from the past tense onward, or truly the perspective of most every other being who has ever lived, will live, or yet lives. You are an other. And yet, have you also not considered that for as limited as you are, you and me, and literally everyone else you know, we're all beings capable of such intimate and awe-inspiring connections that they're the subjects of fascination and beauty and analysis thousands of years into the future? Most only have one body. Most can only live in the present. Most cannot help but view the world from their own eyes, navigate through the world through a single mind, approach interactions from their perspective, and commonly, far too commonly, approach too much of life as though they were the main character, the only, or otherwise most important, person who matters. And yet there's a world of people out there, passing by your hotel window, making their way up and down roads to destinations unknown to you, chatting in coffee shops just out of earshot, and working away behind grills or counters or anywhere, really, living the sorts of lives you could only imagine. But you're only one person, and it's the tragedy of the human condition that you only get to experience so much of it all, to know so many people, and in many cases, beyond a certain point, to close yourself off to all manner of new connections entirely. And yet, one can't help but occasionally wonder what could be. Tell me, do you ever see or hear a stranger passing by and think to yourself, what if they weren't so strange? And if you'd only stop and take a moment or two to get to know one another, you could probably form the basis of a lasting friendship, or any kind of relationship, really, which could follow you for many days to come. Do you ever experience a moment, an unexpectedly glorious and intimate moment, someone all but guaranteed to be someone transient in your life, and wonder what could happen if just for once you decided to swim against fate and societal expectation and get to know them more as a human being? Never let it be said that the world can't be wonderful. The world is full of wonders, and yet it's true that you, being only a single person, with a single body, mind, and soul, aren't liable to experience or even perceive most of them. And yet do you ever stop and wonder just what exactly could happen if you'd only be able to stop every once in a while, regardless of time or circumstance, and connect with the person in front of you as a human being, as their own potential wonder, firmly outside your view, like so many things, just waiting to be realized, if you'd only managed to connect. And yet life slips by, opportunities through one's fingers like water all the time, and though you can balance some in the palm of your hand, at least for a time, so often the tighter you grasp, the more desperately you try to hold on, the more they all slip through your fingers. And even those things which were firmly in your palm will eventually get away from you. It makes one laugh. One such individual being me. But it also gives one pause. At least for a little bit. This is your heinous host, Mr. Dork, signing off for a while. We'll meet again, to be sure, if you're one to care for such things. But for now, as is always the case, the end draws ever nearer. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you in your nightmares.